In a small, dimly lit workshop in Menlo Park, New Jersey, a faint glow began to flicker. It was weak at first, trembling, uncertain, but within seconds, it brightened, pushing the darkness back just enough to reveal the face of a man staring at it with exhausted eyes and trembling hands. Thomas Edison had done it. After thousands of failures, months of sleepless nights, and countless experiments that went nowhere, he had finally created what the world thought was impossible, a light that could last. But before this moment, before that fragile glow changed history, Edison had been just another dreamer. He wasn't born into luxury or privilege. In fact, his childhood was a mess. Born in 1847 in Ohio, he was the youngest of 7 children. His teachers thought he was slow. He barely lasted 3 months in school before his mother decided to teach him herself. He had a strange habit. He asked too many questions. How does this work? Why does this move? What makes that sound? Most adults found him annoying. His curiosity was endless, and his experiments often ended in smoke, literally. Once, he tried to hatch chicken eggs by sitting on them. Another time, he set his family's barn on fire while trying to test a new chemical reaction. But that curiosity, the same thing people mocked, would one day light up the entire planet. By the time Edison turned 12, he was already working on a train, selling candy and newspapers. But instead of wasting his time between stations, he turned one of the empty cars into a mini laboratory. He bought old bottles, wires, acids, anything he could afford. He called it his moving lab. Then, one day, an accident changed everything. He was working with chemicals when the train suddenly shook. A bottle spilled and an explosion followed. The conductor rushed in, furious, and threw young Edison off the train. His lab, gone in flames. That was the day Edison partially lost his hearing. The world went quiet for him. But in that silence, his mind got louder. Years later, as a teenager, he found work as a telegraph operator. He learned to send and receive messages faster than anyone else. The endless clicking of the machine became his new language. And every time he fixed a broken line or built a new switch, he learned a little more about electricity, the invisible force that would later make him a legend. But the world wasn't kind to inventors. For every dreamer, there were 100 critics. People laughed when he said he wanted to make light from electricity. Gas lamps had ruled the streets and homes for years. Electricity was dangerous, unpredictable, and expensive. Even some scientists called him crazy. But Edison had one rule. I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work. In the late 1870s, he set up his dream workshop in Menlo Park, the world's first true research laboratory. It wasn't just a room full of machines. It was a temple for imagination. His team of young engineers worked day and night. They tested thousands of filaments, materials that could glow when electricity passed through them. They tried bamboo, horsehair, cardboard, even human hair. Each burned out within seconds. Months turned into years. People started calling him a fraud. Reporters mocked him. Investors backed out, but Edison didn't stop. One night, while holding a tiny strand of carbonized cotton thread, he decided to test one more experiment. The wire heated up, started glowing, and kept glowing. For hours. 40 hours later, the bulb was still shining. The impossible had just become real. That single light would go on to transform every city, every home, every life. But the world didn't know yet. This was just the beginning, because Edison wasn't chasing light. He was chasing forever. The night after Edison's light first flickered alive, Menlo Park was no longer just a workshop. It became a symbol of hope. Inside, his assistant stood frozen, watching that tiny glowing filament. None of them spoke. None of them breathed. The world had changed, quietly, almost humbly, inside that dusty laboratory. Edison smiled faintly. Not the smile of victory, but of relief. For months he had eaten little, slept less, and argued endlessly with his crew. Now, the impossible had been tamed. Yet the real challenge had only begun, convincing the world to believe in light made from electricity. Outside, people still relied on gas lamps, flickering, smoky, unreliable. Gas companies were powerful and rich. The idea that a little wire could replace fire sounded absurd. Newspapers called Edison the wizard of nonsense. But he didn't care. He once said, "If we all did the things we are capable of, we would literally astound ourselves." He had proved it. Now he needed to make it last. Edison's bulb worked, but only for 40 hours. That wasn't enough. No one would buy a lamp that died in 2 nights. So he and his team began searching for the perfect filament, something that could glow without burning away. They tested everything: strands of grass, silk, coconut fiber, even pieces of cardboard. One by one they failed. Weeks turned to months. His team grew frustrated. Some left. Others fell asleep at their benches. But Edison, half deaf, half exhausted, kept moving like a man possessed. Finally, he found it. In a shipment from Japan, a box of bamboo arrived. The fibers were thin, flexible, and strong. Edison tested it carefully. Hours passed, then days. The filament kept glowing, not 40 hours, not 80, 1,000 hours. It was the birth of the commercial electric bulb. When Edison lit up Menlo Park for the first public demonstration in December 1879, crowds gathered outside his lab. Snow was falling. The world stood in silence as rows of electric bulbs glowed like stars. The air shimmered with soft white light, clean and steady. Unlike anything they had ever seen, people gasped. Some prayed. Others whispered that Edison had stolen light from the heavens. That night, New Jersey didn't sleep. Reporters rushed to telegraph stations to spread the news. By morning, the name Thomas Edison had traveled across America. But behind the applause, a storm was forming. As light spread, so did fear. Gas companies saw their empire collapsing. They mocked Edison's invention, calling it unsafe. Some staged demonstrations claiming electric lights could burn houses down. But the more they attacked, the brighter Edison's dream grew. He was no longer just an inventor. He was a revolutionary, and revolutions attract rivals. In 1884, a young Serbian engineer named Nikola Tesla arrived in the United States with little money but a mind full of lightning. He admired Edison, saw him as a genius. Edison, in turn, hired Tesla to work on improving his electrical systems. For months, they worked together, the practical Edison and the visionary Tesla. But their dreams soon collided. Edison believed in direct current, DC, electricity flowing one way, simple and controllable. Tesla believed in alternating current, AC, electricity that changed direction many times per second, capable of traveling long distances efficiently. Edison saw AC as dangerous. Tesla saw it as the future. Their disagreement exploded into what history now calls the War of Currents. Edison began public campaigns to prove AC was deadly. He even funded shocking demonstrations using animals to scare the public. Meanwhile, Tesla joined forces with George Westinghouse, a powerful industrialist, to prove AC could light entire cities safely. It wasn't just a scientific fight. It was a battle of egos, ideas, and destinies. Edison built his own electric company, Edison Electric Light Company, later part of General Electric, to spread his DC systems. He dreamed of electrifying every home, every street, every factory. But Tesla's AC could go farther, cheaper, faster. And slowly, the world began to turn toward Tesla's vision. Still, Edison refused to see it as defeat. He didn't measure success in battles won, but in possibilities opened. His bulb had sparked an industry, created millions of jobs, and inspired generations of inventors. Even if his current lost, his light remained untouchable. As fame grew, so did criticism. People called him greedy, arrogant, obsessed. Some said he stole ideas from others, but those who knew him closely saw something different, a man consumed by creation itself. He once said, "Genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration." For Edison, every failure was just another step closer to success. He rarely stopped working. Even after the bulb, he went on to invent the phonograph, the first device to record and play sound, and the motion picture camera, bringing life to still images. Every invention connected to the next, like chapters in one giant story, the story of human progress. One evening, a journalist visited his workshop. He found Edison surrounded by broken glass, copper wires, and dozens of failed bulbs. The air smelled of burnt metal. Edison barely noticed him. The reporter asked, "Mr. Edison, after all these failures, how do you keep going?" Edison looked up, smiled, and replied, "Failures? I haven't failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." That one line became his legacy. Not the bulb, not the patents, not the fame, but that attitude. Because every time he failed, he discovered a new boundary of possibility. And every time he succeeded, humanity took another step forward. By 1882, Edison's dream took physical form. He built the world's first electric power station on Pearl Street in New York City. When the switch was flipped, entire city blocks lit up simultaneously for the first time in history. People cheered. Crowds gathered below the glowing windows. A newspaper headline read, "The sun rises twice over New York." From that day on, darkness would never rule again. But fame came at a price. The world started demanding more. More inventions. More ideas. Edison had built an empire of light. Now he needed to protect it. The war of currents raged on, but the man who lit the world didn't slow down. He was already thinking of new dreams, recording voices, capturing motion, building the future one spark at a time. And through it all, he carried one belief in his heart. There's a better way to do it. Find it. By the end of the 1880s, Edison had become both a hero and a symbol. He had turned darkness into opportunity. And though his rivalry with Tesla burned bright in history, both men shared one invisible bond. Their light came from the same place, a desire to change the world. Edison's invention didn't just light homes. It lit minds. It showed that human determination could turn failure into fire. The bulb was never just glass and wire. It was courage trapped in a vacuum, burning steadily against the dark. By the dawn of the 1890s, Thomas Edison was more than a man. He was a movement. The air of Menlo Park hummed with invention. His laboratories glowed day and night, filled with sparks, metal, and music from strange machines. Visitors described the place like a living engine, hundreds of minds working as one under the direction of a man who never seemed to sleep. Edison's obsession had changed form. The bulb was only the beginning. Now he wanted to shape everything: sound, motion, communication, and energy. He once said to his assistants, "We will make electricity so cheap that only the rich will burn candles." And he meant it. Each morning, he would appear in his black coat, eyes slightly red from lack of sleep, a notebook in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. "Gentlemen," he'd say, "the world isn't finished yet." And then he'd disappear into the workshop. The lab was chaos, but a beautiful one. Screws, copper coils, glass tubes, and chemical jars cluttered the benches. Assistants shouted measurements across the room. Sparks crackled from test circuits. The smell of burnt metal mixed with ink and sweat. This was Edison's orchestra, and he was the conductor. But as Edison's fame grew, so did the storm around him. The war of currents with Tesla and Westinghouse intensified. Cities had to choose between Edison's direct current, DC systems, and Tesla's alternating current, AC. Posters appeared across the country. "AC is dangerous. Protect your family from the death current." Edison's team staged demonstrations using AC power to shock animals, hoping to prove Tesla's current unsafe. It was cruel, controversial, and effective. But Tesla countered with brilliance. At the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, he and Westinghouse powered the entire event with AC, lighting up more than 100,000 bulbs. The world gasped again. The light that Edison had started was now being carried by another hand. For a while, Edison retreated from the fight. His mind shifted to a new obsession: sound. He wanted to trap the voice to make memory physical. People laughed when he spoke of recording sound. They said it was impossible. Sound vanished the moment it was made. But one night, he took a thin sheet of tinfoil, wrapped it around a rotating cylinder, and spoke into a small horn. Mary had a little lamb. The needle vibrated, cutting grooves into the foil. When Edison replayed it, the words echoed back, metallic, ghostly, but clear enough to make the room freeze. They had just heard the first recorded voice in history. Edison jumped from his chair, shouting, "I can record the human soul!" The phonograph was born, the ancestor of every record player, cassette, CD, and MP3 that ever followed. The same man who gave light to darkness had now given memory to sound. Investors flooded his company. Orders poured in. Edison's name became synonymous with progress. But the man himself began to change. Fame came with enemies, lawsuits, and exhaustion. He often skipped meals, ignored sleep, and worked until his hands shook, yet he refused to slow down. "Rest," he said once, "is for those who have nothing left to do." He built Edison General Electric, creating entire factories that produced light bulbs, wiring systems, and electrical generators. Towns sprang up around his inventions. Street lamps burned through the night. Newspapers declared him the man who tamed lightning. But every empire casts a shadow. Inside Edison's labs, a quiet rebellion grew. Some assistants whispered that he took too much credit. Dozens of unnamed inventors worked tirelessly under his direction, filing patents in his name. But Edison saw it differently. He was the vision, they were the tools. "I give them the dream," he said once, "and they give it form." Meanwhile, across the country, Tesla was building his own legend. He spoke of wireless power, machines that could transmit energy through the air, and cities that would never go dark. Newspapers called him the electric prophet. The world began to see two geniuses, one practical, one visionary. Edison built machines for today. Tesla dreamed of machines for tomorrow. Their rivalry shaped the entire modern world. In 1892, Edison faced one of his hardest moments. His company merged with others to form General Electric, and though he remained a symbolic leader, much of his control slipped away. New management, new investors, new priorities. The empire he had built was no longer entirely his. Still, Edison didn't stop. He turned his eyes to motion, how to capture life itself. He believed if he could make sound permanent, he could make movement permanent too. So his team began experimenting with strips of photographic film. They built spinning cylinders, shutters, and lenses that captured hundreds of images per minute. The result was crude but revolutionary, a flickering image that moved when light passed through it. He called it the kinetoscope, the first motion picture camera. People lined up to peer through its tiny peephole, watching short clips of dancers, boxers, and jugglers. For the first time, life itself could be replayed. The birth of cinema had begun, right in Edison's workshop. The 1890s became known as the Age of Invention, and Edison stood at its center. America was transforming. Telephones, electric trains, early automobiles. Cities glowed at night like constellations on Earth. Children grew up never knowing a world without light. Edison was celebrated, painted, photographed, and endlessly quoted. But the man behind the fame remained strangely distant. He avoided social events, rarely took vacations, and kept notebooks full of sketches, numbers, and untested ideas. In one entry, he wrote, "The moment I stop creating, I start dying. It wasn't pride, it was purpose." He truly believed invention was a form of life itself. As the century turned, Edison's house in New Jersey glowed brighter than any palace. Inside his private lab, he worked on new materials, rubber, batteries, even concrete furniture. He was fascinated by how far electricity could go, not just to light homes, but to move cars, power factories, and connect people across continents. He often invited children from the neighborhood to visit and see the machines. "Remember," he'd tell them, There's nothing magic here, only curiosity. But while he inspired millions, he also felt time catching up. His once black hair had turned silver. His hearing, always weak, began to fade completely. The noise of his machines became distant hums. And yet, even in silence, Edison kept working, guided by light alone. In 1896, he collaborated with a young inventor named William Kennedy Laurie Dixon to improve the kinetoscope. Together, they introduced the first projected motion picture, moving images on a large screen for crowds to watch. People screamed, laughed, cried. When they saw a train coming toward the camera, they ducked. For a brief moment, Edison's invention blurred the line between imagination and reality. The dream of cinema, the art of capturing time, had arrived. By the end of the decade, Thomas Edison had become one of the most famous men alive. He had invented the light bulb, the phonograph, and motion pictures. He had changed the rhythm of human life, how we work, how we rest, how we dream. But behind that brilliance, a question still burned. Had the man who gave light to the world lost his own? Edison's empire was vast, but his heart was restless. He had lit the night, captured the voice, frozen movement, yet something inside him whispered, "There's still more." And so, as the new century dawned, the old wizard returned to his laboratory, his candle of curiosity still burning bright. The new century arrived with thunder. Automobiles were rattling down cobblestone streets, telephones were buzzing across cities, and factories were waking up before dawn, all because of electricity. And at the heart of this revolution stood one man, Thomas Alva Edison. Every newspaper called him the Wizard of Menlo Park. But Edison laughed at the nickname. "There's no magic in what I do," he said once. "Only hard work and a lot of broken glass." Still, the world didn't see him as just a man. He was a symbol. The light bulb had turned him into a myth, the phonograph into a legend, and motion pictures into an immortal. But behind that fame, Edison remained stubbornly human, a man addicted to invention. His home laboratory in West Orange, New Jersey, had grown into a fortress of creativity. It had its own machine shops, chemistry labs, libraries, and even a small movie studio. More than 100 assistants worked there day and night, turning his wildest sketches into reality. Each morning, Edison would step into his lab with his sleeves rolled up, eyes sharp, ready for battle. "Let's make something the world doesn't know it needs yet," he'd say. And the race would begin. By 1900, Edison had turned his attention toward a new frontier, motion pictures with sound. Silent films had become popular, but Edison wanted more. He wanted people to see and hear history. He began working on synchronizing the phonograph with his motion picture camera. The idea was breathtaking. Imagine seeing an actor speak and hearing his real voice at the same time. For months, his team struggled with timing, mechanics, and distortion. Edison would pace the lab floor, muttering, "Every invention fails 1,000 times before it speaks." Finally, after endless adjustments, the machine worked. Briefly, imperfectly, but it worked. The first talking picture flickered to life. A man playing the violin while sound echoed from a nearby phonograph horn. The synchronization was off by seconds, but it was still a miracle. Edison smiled faintly. "It's not perfect," he said, "but the idea is alive." Meanwhile, his fame had grown beyond control. World leaders wrote him letters. Children named their pets Eddie. Even kings and presidents asked to visit his labs. But fame never impressed Edison. He still wore the same plain suits, ate simple meals, and preferred the company of machines over men. When a journalist asked what it felt like to be the world's greatest inventor, Edison chuckled and said, "It feels like being the world's most exhausted man." He wasn't joking. The older he got, the more relentless he became. Nights without sleep turned into weeks. His notebooks multiplied into thousands. Some pages were filled with brilliant formulas, others with failed dreams. One page read simply, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." But as Edison conquered the world with his machines, life tested him in quieter, crueler ways. In 1904, his beloved first wife, Mary, passed away suddenly from illness. The loss hit him harder than any failed experiment. For days, he didn't step into his lab. His assistants whispered outside his office, unsure how to comfort the man who had lit the world yet couldn't light his own heart. Then, one evening, Edison appeared in the workshop again, his eyes hollow but determined. "Work," he said softly. "Work heals." It became his medicine. Within months, he was back to inventing, this time focusing on electric storage batteries, which he believed would power the next generation of automobiles. He envisioned a world of silent, clean cars gliding down electric roads. Gasoline, he said, is noisy, dirty, and temporary. Electricity is eternal. Years later, his friend Henry Ford would turn that dream into reality. The two men often met to exchange ideas, walking together in deep conversations about the future. Ford called him his greatest inspiration. Edison called Ford his mechanical son. Their friendship became one of history's most beautiful alliances, invention meeting motion. By 1910, Edison's labs had become a living museum of modernity. There were rooms filled with glowing bulbs, phonographs, motion cameras, and electrical generators. He filed more than 1,000 patents, more than any other human in history at that time. But despite the success, Edison never stopped experimenting. He once said, "There's a better way to do it. Find it." And he lived by those words every single day. The First World War broke out in 1914, and once again, Edison stepped forward, not as a soldier, but as a scientist. He worked for the U.S. Navy, designing underwater detection systems, torpedoes, and communication equipment. He refused to create weapons of destruction, saying, "I will never invent anything meant to kill." Instead, he poured his genius into saving lives. His wartime inventions helped ships avoid mines and submarines. The government praised him, but Edison just smiled and said, "I only tried to make the ocean a little less deadly." The world saw a hero. Edison saw a duty. As the 1920s arrived, Edison's age began to show. His hearing almost gone, his hands slower, but his mind still electric. He walked with a cane, carried his notebook everywhere, and continued to dream like a young inventor. He often said, "The moment I stop learning, bury me." Visitors who met him were shocked at how humble he was. Despite owning factories, labs, and fame, he never saw himself as rich. When asked about wealth, he said, "To have an idea that changes the world, that's the only fortune worth having." In 1922, tragedy struck again. A massive fire tore through his laboratories at West Orange. The night sky turned red as years of invention burned to ash. His employees cried, watching everything they'd built collapse in flames. But when Edison arrived at the scene, he didn't panic. He stood quietly, watching the fire consume his life's work. Then, turning to his son, he said calmly, "Go get your mother. She'll never see a fire like this again." The next morning, with smoke still rising from the ruins, Edison told his workers, "We've just cleared out the old mistakes. Now we'll start fresh." Within weeks, he rebuilt everything, bigger, stronger, faster. The fire that destroyed his lab became the spark that reignited his spirit. By the mid-1920s, Edison's experiments turned toward rubber and batteries again. He believed that one day the world would depend entirely on electric power, from transportation to homes to factories. "Electricity is the nervous system of civilization," he declared. He worked alongside Henry Ford and Harvey Firestone, traveling the country, testing plants for synthetic rubber. Even in his 70s, he could be found in the lab at 3 a.m., adjusting wires, scribbling notes, chasing the next impossible idea. When reporters asked why he still worked so hard, Edison smiled and said, "I'm not chasing success anymore. I'm chasing curiosity." The world around him had changed completely. Airplanes crossed oceans, radios carried voices through the sky, and neon lights painted cities in color. But at the center of it all, one light, Edison's, still burned. People no longer just saw him as an inventor. They saw him as the living embodiment of human progress. He had become what every dreamer wanted to be. Proof that one person could truly change the world. But even legends grow old. And as Edison's light began to dim, he prepared to pass it on to the next generation of dreamers who would carry the flame forward. By the time the 1930s rolled in, the world that Thomas Edison had helped build was glowing brighter than ever. Cities shimmered like constellations on the ground. Neon signs danced on every corner, and the hum of electricity filled the night air like music. But the man who had given the world its light was beginning to fade. His hair had turned the color of the very filaments he once created, pale silver, thin, and glowing under the lab lamps. His hands, once steady as machines, now trembled slightly as he wrote in his notebooks. Yet his spirit, that unstoppable flame of curiosity, refused to go out. He still came to the lab every morning, leaning on his cane, eyes sharp as ever. His assistants would greet him with respect, not out of obligation, but out of awe. Because even now at 70, Edison was still inventing. In one of his journals he wrote, "There are no rules here. We're trying to accomplish something that's never been done before." The old wizard's focus had shifted to electric cars once again. He was convinced that gasoline was just a phase, a dirty detour on the road to the electric future. "The car of the future will run on light," he said, half joking, half prophesying. Together with Henry Ford, he tested new batteries made from nickel and iron, strong, cheap, long-lasting. The two old friends often sat together under the open sky, watching the hum of the modern world they'd helped create. Ford would sometimes tease him, "Tom, you gave the world light, but you still can't take a day off." And Edison would laugh, "If I take a day off, who will keep it lit?" Their friendship was legendary. Two giants of invention, one who made things move, and one who made them glow. In those years, Edison's home became both a workshop and a museum. The walls were lined with his earliest inventions: strange wires, cracked bulbs, glass tubes, phonograph cylinders, and reels of film. He often invited schoolchildren to visit, guiding them through the corridors of curiosity. He'd hold up the first light bulb and say, "This little thing started everything you see today." The children would stare in wonder, some whispering like they were in a temple. One boy once asked, "Mr. Edison, were you ever scared when you failed?" Edison smiled kindly and replied, "I never failed, son. I just found thousands of ways that didn't work." That single line became one of the greatest quotes in history, a beacon for dreamers everywhere. But age was catching up. His hearing was almost gone, and the constant hum of the lab had turned into a faint vibration in his bones. Still, he worked. Every day, he refused to retire. "Retirement," he once told a reporter, "is what happens when a man stops asking questions." Yet, quietly, Edison began preparing for the inevitable. He started training his sons, Charles and Theodore, to manage his companies and laboratories. He told them not to worship his past, but to invent their own futures. "Never live in the shadow of my light," he told Charles. "Build your own." It was the greatest gift a father could give. In 1931, Edison's health took a turn. The endless nights and the chemicals of his experiments had taken their toll. His body was frail, but his mind remained alert. He spent more time sitting by the window of his home in West Orange, looking out over the garden that bloomed under the same light his inventions had created. Visitors came from around the world, scientists, presidents, journalists, and friends, all to see the man who had changed the world. He greeted them with gentle humor, always curious about their ideas. Once, a young inventor nervously told him about a new electrical motor he was developing. Edison listened quietly, nodded, and said, "Don't ask if it will work. Ask how to make it work better." Even on his deathbed, he was still teaching. One October night in 1931, the great inventor's health worsened. His breathing slowed, his heartbeat weak. His family gathered around him, his wife Mina, his sons, and close friends like Henry Ford. The room was silent, except for the gentle crackle of the electric lamps glowing softly on the table. It was poetic. The light he had given the world was now watching over him. In his final moments, Edison opened his eyes and whispered to Mina, "It is very beautiful over there." And then, the man who had brought light to darkness closed his eyes for the last time. Thomas Alva Edison, the boy who once sold newspapers on trains, who failed thousands of times, who gave humanity the power to conquer the night, was gone. But his light never went out. News of his passing spread like lightning. Across the globe, cities dimmed their lights for 1 minute in tribute. Streets that once shone with his invention went dark in silent respect. From New York to London to Tokyo, millions stood in that soft darkness, realizing what it felt like before Edison. Then, the lights came back on, brighter than ever, a final salute to the man who made it all possible. After his death, Henry Ford preserved Edison's last test tube of air, the air from his final breath, sealing it in glass at the Henry Ford Museum. Ford believed it contained the spirit of invention itself, a reminder that curiosity never dies. The test tube still exists today, resting quietly in the museum's display, labeled Edison's last breath. It's a hauntingly beautiful symbol, as if the very breath that once whispered ideas into the universe still floats inside that tiny glass. Edison's legacy spread beyond light bulbs and phonographs. He had changed the rhythm of human life. Before him, night meant rest, silence, darkness. After him, night became just another canvas for work, art, and dreams. Every time a light switch flicks on, every time music is recorded, every time a movie plays, Edison's spirit flickers through it. He didn't just invent things. He invented possibility. He showed the world that failure isn't the end. It's the first step toward something greater. Years later, his son Charles took over the company, carrying forward the same philosophy: innovate, fail, and try again. Generations of scientists, engineers, and dreamers grew up reading Edison's quotes, watching his life like a guidebook for creation. Albert Einstein once said, "Edison taught us that genius is not a gift, it's a habit." And perhaps that's the truest definition of his genius. Edison didn't wait for inspiration. He built it with his hands. Decades later, when astronauts walked on the moon, their words were transmitted through microphones, wires, and signals powered by the descendants of Edison's inventions. The Earth glowed in the background, one small, shining ball of light, proof of what his curiosity had started. Somewhere, in that endless universe of darkness, Edison's dream continued, a reminder that even the smallest spark can change everything. The world that Thomas Edison left behind did not mourn him for long. It celebrated him, not with tears, but with brilliance. Within just a few years of his death, electricity became the bloodstream of modern civilization. Cities expanded, machines roared to life, and the world he had dreamed of finally began to exist. When Edison first created light, people saw it as a luxury. But now, light was a birthright. Every home, factory, and street pulsed with energy. Humanity had extended the day into the night. Time itself had been conquered, and in every glowing bulb, every flicker of neon, there was a whisper. Edison was here. The age of illumination. By the mid-20th century, the transformation was unstoppable. The night was no longer a void. It became alive. Airports sparkled, bridges glowed, cities shone like galaxies. The world became a living constellation, a mirror of the sky. Electricity powered more than just light. It powered imagination. Radios spoke across continents. Televisions brought moving images into every home. Scientists, engineers, and dreamers were suddenly connected by invisible threads of current, the same kind Edison once tamed in his small New Jersey lab. He had set off a chain reaction of progress that no one could stop. The ripple effect of an idea. Edison's influence reached far beyond his inventions. Every industry that rose after him, telecommunications, cinema, sound, computing, grew from the seeds he had planted. Think of it. The phonograph became the ancestor of every music player, from vinyl to Spotify. The motion picture camera became the parent of Hollywood and the global entertainment industry. The light bulb became the heart of every home, every office, every space station. His inventions became ecosystems, not products. And his greatest creation wasn't light itself, it was a mindset. The idea that anything could be built, improved, or reinvented if one simply refused to quit. The Edison mindset generations of scientists studied his work not just for knowledge, but for attitude. He wasn't a genius in the traditional sense. He was relentless. He believed genius was 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. And the world finally understood what that meant. In a world obsessed with instant results, Edison's life was a reminder that progress is a process. He had failed 10,000 times, and yet, he succeeded once in a way that changed everything. Every entrepreneur, engineer, and innovator since has carried a fragment of that mindset. When Steve Jobs launched the first iPhone, when Elon Musk tested rockets, when inventors designed quantum computers, all were, in a way, walking through doors Edison had unlocked. He taught humanity how to think like creators, not just consumers. Beyond the Earth decades after Edison's death, his dream of a fully electrified world reached beyond the planet itself. In July 1969, as Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon, millions watched from glowing screens. The light from those televisions was the great-grandchild of Edison's bulb, the microphone that carried Armstrong's voice, the radio that transmitted it, the generators that powered it. All were connected by the same lineage of innovation. From Edison's glass bulb to the glow of lunar light, the journey was complete. Humanity had carried its own light into the void. The modern spark fast forward to the 21st century. The world pulses with energy, from smart homes to satellites, from neon cities to the quiet hum of laptops in every corner of the globe. Edison's invention no longer lives in a single bulb. It's in the pixels of your screen, the LED lights on your keyboard, the street lights outside your window, and even in the tiny glow of your phone charging at night. Every light, no matter how small, is a descendant of his dream. We no longer ask, "Who gave us light?" We live inside it. The philosophy of creation, Edison once said, "I never perfected an invention that I did not think about in terms of the service it might give others." That was his real genius. He didn't invent for glory. He invented for people. He saw problems where others saw impossibility. He saw beauty in function, poetry in machinery. To him, every spark was sacred, every invention, a form of art. That philosophy became the foundation of modern innovation. It inspired a generation of creators to make technology human, not just powerful. From medical devices saving lives to AI systems solving crises, every modern breakthrough carries a trace of Edison's belief. To invent is to improve life. The endless experiment science to Edison was never a subject, it was a story. And that story never truly ended. Today, scientists still chase light, not the kind that glows, but the kind that reveals. They study photons, quantum particles, and the origins of the universe itself, searching for the same answers Edison once sought in his laboratory. When physicists split light into spectra, when engineers create lasers that perform surgery, or when astronomers peer through telescopes a billion miles away, they're all asking Edison's question in new ways. How far can light go? A humanity's eternal flame. If you stand on Earth today, at night, and look from space, the planet looks like a shimmering orb of gold and silver. That is Edison's monument. No marble statue could capture what he achieved. No book could measure it. His legacy isn't made of stone. It's made of photons. Every streetlight glowing in the dark, every lamp flickering during a storm. Every child doing homework under a desk light. That's Edison's spirit at work. He gave humanity more than invention. He gave it continuity. The power to keep going even when darkness falls. The lesson that outlived the inventor, even now, nearly a century after his death, people quote his words to keep moving forward. Entrepreneurs write them on office walls. Students learn them before exams. Engineers engrave them into blueprints. Edison became a symbol, not of light, but of effort, because his real discovery wasn't electricity. It was persistence. One evening, long after his death, a visitor walked through the Edison Laboratory Museum in West Orange. The air smelled faintly of oil, wood, and old paper. Dust floated in the yellow light. There, on a table under glass, was one of his original bulbs, still faintly glowing. The label read, "One of Edison's first successful filaments. Tested in 1879. The visitor leaned closer, staring at the tiny thread burning softly after all those years. It was fragile, ancient, and almost alive, and for a moment, it felt as if Edison himself was still there, working quietly in the next room, sketching, experimenting, laughing at the idea that anyone would ever stop asking, "What if?" Because somewhere, in every shining window, in every glowing screen, in every midnight idea, there's still a spark of that same relentless mind whispering, "There's a better way. Keep going." Long after Edison's own light had dimmed, his ideas began to glow in the minds of others. The flame he kindled in Menlo Park was no longer confined to a single laboratory. It had become a living current running through time itself. Every new generation of scientists, dreamers, and inventors carried a piece of that same electricity inside them, because innovation is never born in isolation. It passes from one curious mind to another, like a relay of fire, and the next bearer of that flame was already waiting in the shadows, Nikola Tesla. The rivalry that shaped the modern world in the late 1880s, as cities buzzed under Edison's new electric lamps, another genius emerged, tall, quiet, and entirely different in spirit. Tesla believed in alternating current, AC, a system far more efficient than Edison's direct current, DC. Edison was practical. Tesla was visionary. Edison worked through experiments. Tesla worked through imagination. Edison made machines. Tesla made magic. When Tesla joined Edison's company, their partnership was destined to clash. Edison saw electricity as a controllable servant, something to harness carefully and safely. Tesla saw it as an infinite sea of power, waiting to be unleashed. When their ideas collided, history caught fire. The war of currents, the rivalry between Edison and Tesla wasn't just scientific, it was philosophical. Edison's DC system was safe, but limited. Tesla's AC could power cities across continents. But Edison, unwilling to give up his own empire, fought back. He launched public campaigns warning that Tesla's AC was dangerous, even using it to power electric chairs in gruesome demonstrations. The newspapers called it the War of Currents, but the world was changing faster than Edison could control. Tesla's vision eventually won. AC became the global standard. And yet, even in defeat, Edison's influence remained. Without Edison's groundwork, Tesla might never have had the stage to challenge him. Together, through rivalry, struggle, and passion, they built the electrical age. Their conflict wasn't about who was right. It was proof that competition drives creation. The next generation of dreamers, as the 20th century raced forward, the light from Menlo Park spread into every field of innovation. Edison's research-first mindset became the foundation of modern laboratories. From the glowing tubes of early televisions to the circuits of the first computers, each new discovery echoed his principle. There's always a better way. Then came a young man named Steve Jobs, sitting barefoot in a California garage, staring at a simple screen. He wasn't holding wires or bulbs. He was holding light in a new form, digital light. The pixels on that screen were the descendants of Edison's glow. The same dream, making light serve humanity, had evolved into information, into connection, into vision. Jobs once said, "Those who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do." It was the same madness Edison carried in his eyes when the world laughed at his flickering lamp. From bulb to brain, The rise of the digital mind. By the early 2000s, light became language. Fiber optics carried information through beams of pure illumination. What Edison created to chase away darkness now powered the internet itself, a glowing web connecting billions of minds. Every video streamed, every message sent, every phone charged was made possible by that same invisible force, electricity. And as machines grew smarter, something remarkable began to happen. Humanity started to teach its creations how to think. Artificial intelligence was born, not from darkness, but from data, light, and logic. The glowing screens of today are the modern candles of Edison's era, except now, they don't just shine, they learn. In the lab of forever somewhere, deep in a quiet lab filled with wires, glass, and humming circuits, a young engineer works through the night. The glow from his computer lights his tired face as he adjusts code, reworks designs, and chases perfection. He doesn't notice the time. He doesn't care about failure. He's obsessed, just like Edison was 150 years ago. He drinks coffee, mutters calculations under his breath, and whispers, "One more try." That's the real inheritance of Edison, not the light bulb, but the obsession with creation. Every coder, engineer, and inventor today carries that same restlessness. The desire to make something that outlives them. The belief that the next discovery is just one more experiment away. The energy of the future today. The world faces challenges Edison couldn't have imagined: climate change, energy crises, and digital overload. But the search for light hasn't stopped. It has simply evolved. Solar energy panels now absorb sunlight, turning nature's glow into power. Wind turbines dance in open fields, storing invisible energy. And electric cars glide through cities silently, powered by the same electrons Edison once tried to trap in a filament. Humanity has taken the gift of light and learned to make it cleaner, smarter, and infinite. In a way, the world is still perfecting his invention, the quest to capture energy, control it, and share it freely. When the world glows stand in any city tonight, look around. The neon lights, the glowing skyscrapers, the digital billboards, all of them tell a single story. The light never went out. Even during power cuts, when the city falls dark for a moment, someone lights a candle. Proof that the instinct to fight darkness is hardwired into our souls. Edison may not have known it, but he didn't just invent light. He awakened humanity's greatest survival trait: hope. Every time we flip a switch, charge a phone, or look at a glowing screen, we're repeating the same act he did that night in Menlo Park, bringing the dark to its knees. The torch of tomorrow, and now, as we step into an era of quantum computing and space travel, the question has changed again. It's no longer how can we light the world, but how can we light the universe? From solar panels on Mars rovers to glowing fiber cables under the sea, Edison's spark has spread to every frontier. Maybe one day, when humanity colonizes distant planets, they'll build their first settlement under artificial light. And somewhere, carved into the wall of a research dome, they'll write his name, Thomas Edison, the man who taught us to chase light. A legacy that refuses to dim. Edison's genius wasn't just in creating inventions, it was in inspiring invention itself. He made the world believe that failure was not a dead end, but a detour. And that belief has built everything since, from skyscrapers to smartphones, from electric dreams to digital consciousness. Light was only the beginning. The real revolution was possibility, because as long as there are minds willing to ask, what if? His light will never truly fade. The older Edison grew, the quieter his laboratory became. The hum of wires and the clatter of tools faded into a slower rhythm, the steady tapping of a pencil, the creak of a chair, the breathing of a man who had spent a lifetime chasing light. The world outside Menlo Park was changing faster than ever. Cities no longer slept. Streets glowed through the night, powered by the same invention that had once seemed impossible. The world was awake, alive, because of him. But inside his home in West Orange, New Jersey, Thomas Edison sat surrounded not by machines, but by memories. His once young hands were wrinkled, his hearing almost gone. Yet his mind still burned with the same curiosity that had guided him since boyhood. He would still ask the same question every morning. What can I make better today? Even when his body began to fail, he refused to stop working. To him, rest was the enemy. As long as he could breathe, he could invent. A life built on Sparks's home had become a museum of his own past. Shelves lined with glass bulbs, prototypes, batteries, phonographs, each one a chapter of his story. The electric car he once designed sat in a corner, forgotten. Piles of failed experiments gathered dust, their labels faded with time. But to Edison, they weren't failures. They were footsteps. He often told visitors, "I owe my success to failure. Each mistake taught me what not to do." Even in old age, that fire didn't fade. When doctors warned him to rest, he just smiled and said, "Rest is for those who have nothing left to create." He worked on improving the battery, the cement process, and even tried to invent a way to preserve rubber. He wasn't trying to make money anymore. He was trying to outlive time itself through ideas. A world transformed by light by the 1920s, Edison was no longer just an inventor. He was a symbol. Children learned his name in schoolbooks. Newspapers called him the Wizard of Menlo Park. Factories, railways, and cities all ran on the foundation he had built. One night, a journalist visited him and asked, "Mr. Edison, when you see how your light has changed the world, what do you feel?" Edison looked up, smiled faintly, and said, "I feel there's still more darkness left to conquer." Those words summed up his life perfectly. He never saw the light bulb as a final destination, only a doorway. Every invention to him was a bridge to the next question, the next experiment, the next miracle. The world pauses to say thank you in 1929. On the 50th anniversary of his electric light, the entire world gathered to honor him. Presidents, scientists, and inventors from around the globe came together for a grand celebration at his laboratory. Among the guests was a young man who had once worked under him, Henry Ford, the automobile giant. Ford had always seen Edison as a father figure, and he wanted to pay tribute in the most fitting way possible. He rebuilt Edison's original Menlo Park laboratory, piece by piece, at his museum in Michigan. Even the original chair, table, and wires were brought in. And that night, when Ford asked Edison to press the switch one last time, the room filled with the familiar golden glow. It was as if the entire planet took a collective breath, watching the man who had given light to billions ignite one more bulb. The light that would never go out. Edison's health began to decline soon after. He grew weaker, his movements slower, but his spirit remained unbroken. Every day, he still visited his lab, touching the tools, watching the glow of the filaments, and whispering ideas to himself. In those final months, his wife Mina stayed by his side. She often found him awake late at night, staring at the soft light of a single bulb in his room. "Tom," she asked once, "what are you thinking about?" He smiled. "I'm thinking about the next idea," he said. "Even now?" she asked. "Especially now," he replied. October 18th, 1931, the final spark on that quiet autumn morning, Thomas Edison took his last breath. The man who had filled the world with light slipped gently into the dark, or perhaps into another kind of light we cannot see. Henry Ford, heartbroken, did something extraordinary. He sealed the air from Edison's last breath inside a glass tube, now displayed at the Henry Ford Museum. It was symbolic, a poetic gesture to capture the final spark of the man who had taught humanity to chase illumination. The newspapers the next day read, "The light that never dies has gone out." But they were wrong. Edison's light had not gone out. It had multiplied into every home, every lamp, every idea that burns bright in the mind of a creator, the echo of an idea years later. Scientists working on renewable energy, space exploration, and artificial intelligence would all trace their roots back to that single truth Edison lived by. Never stop experimenting. He showed the world that science isn't magic, it's persistence. That invention isn't about brilliance, it's about patience. Every discovery made since then, from nuclear fusion to neural networks, has been one more echo of Edison's dream: to turn imagination into something real. When astronauts walked on the moon, their first step was guided by light from electric lamps, descendants of Edison's invention. When doctors today use lasers to save lives, they use focused light, a child of the same principle. Edison's dream didn't just survive. It evolved into everything we see around us: the immortal glow imagined standing in front of a city skyline at night. The buildings shine, the streets shimmer, and billions of tiny lights form a constellation on Earth. That's not just electricity. That's history glowing. That's one man's dream still alive. In that glow lives every sleepless night, every failed experiment, every spark of hope that once flickered in a dusty lab in Menlo Park. Thomas Edison didn't just give light to the world, he gave it direction. He proved that curiosity can conquer darkness, and that one person's obsession can change the course of humanity, the eternal lesson. If you listen closely, you can still hear him, not through sound, but through inspiration. In every scientist who refuses to give up, in every creator who stays awake past midnight chasing perfection, in every kid who breaks a toy just to see how it works. That's Edison, reborn again and again in every curious soul who dares to ask, why not? Because the truth is, the light was never just about electricity. It was about human will, the power to imagine a brighter world and make it real. The light of forever. So tonight, when you switch off your lamp, take one last look at that glow before it fades. Realize that you're looking at the heartbeat of history, a pulse started by a man who refused to let darkness win. And if you close your eyes, maybe you'll hear a whisper in that fading hum. There's always a better way. Because somewhere, in some lab, another mind is already working on the next light. And that's how Edison's legacy truly lives on, not in wires or glass, but in the unstoppable curiosity of humankind.